My name is Jamie Caroon, and I am the Medical Director at the Center for Medical Cannabis Education in San Diego. In this video, we are going to take a quick look at the Indica versus Sativa debate, and we're going to start by talking about the plant itself. I start with the plant because there's still a lot of confusion about the classification of the plant itself, especially around Indica and Sativa and speciation. This is rather controversial in the world of botanical taxonomy, but experts in this field generally agree that cannabis is monotypic and that there's one species, the Sativa species. And the genus of this plant is cannabis. So the scientific or the botanical name is Cannabis sativa. It is a member of the Cannabaceae family. And the genetic differences between Indica and Sativa, according to botanical taxonomists, are not distinct enough to warrant separate speciation. And we'll talk a little bit more about Indica and Sativa, but they are essentially subspecies of Cannabis sativa. The two most common names for this plant are hemp and marijuana. Hemp is a fiber type classification of the plant. Marijuana is a drug type classification, both recreational and medical. In cannabis lore, sativas produce a different subjective experience for the user than indicas do. It is said that sativas are energetic and uplifting and good to use during the day, and that indicas are sedative, good for pain, and good to use at night. And this story is propagated from person to person, and there have been quite a few scientific studies to explore this. But before we talk about that, if there was a different subjective experience trying an indica or a sativa, and it had nothing to do with the individual person's biology, which is very variable from person to person, then it would have to be due to the chemical constituents in the cannabis. And if the effect was consistent across people, we would expect a certain chemical fingerprint for an indica and a distinct chemical fingerprint for a sativa, such that if you tested these thousands of samples of indicas and sativas, they would separate in some way based upon this chemical fingerprint. And the truth of the matter is that is actually not the case. When these studies are done, there's just such a broad array of chemical constituents that the labels indica and sativa are not very reflective of the formula or the chemical fingerprint. Oftentimes for cultivators, they are determined by the phenotype or the physical appearance of the plant. And plants that are tall and thin with wide nodes and more narrow, long leaflets are considered sativas. And the shorter plants that are fat with more narrow spacing between the nodes, and the leaflets that are shorter and wider, that have more flowers, the more densely packed flowers, are thought to be indicas, just based upon the phenotype, which is a reflection of the genotype. But the phenotype of the plant doesn't accurately characterize or predict the chemical constituency. But many people do report reliable differences in their subjective experience when using different strains or chemovars of cannabis. And many attribute these differences to other compounds besides THC and CBD. Very often, these effects are attributed to terpenes or secondary cannabinoids. In an experimental model, if we had 3 different chemovars of cannabis, sativa, indica, and a hybrid that were standardized for the THC and CBD content, and they did reliably produce different subjective experiences across a group of participants, we would have to believe that these effects, if they weren't due to the individual biology, were due to other compounds. So perhaps they are due to the terpenes and the terpenoids, and that this is part of an overall entourage effect. Thanks for your time and attention. Please reach out to me if you have any questions.